4.5 in, 110 mm, tire width. Wheels has about the same outer diameter as 30 in, 760 mm, clincher tires. All tires in this time period used an inner tube to hold the pressurized air. Tubeless tires were not generally in use until much later. Wheelbases 100 in, 254 cm, and standard track width was 56 in, 142 cm, 60 in, 152 cm. Track could be attained on special order, for southern roads, identical to the pre-Civil War track gauge for many railroads in the former Confederacy. The standard 56-inch track being very near the 4 feet 812 in, 143.5 centimeters, inch standard railroad track gauge, meant that Model Ts could be and frequently were, fitted with flange wheels and used as motorized railway vehicles or speeders. The availability of a 60 in, 152 centimeters, version meant the same could be done on the few remaining southern 5 feet, 152 centimeters, railways, these being the only non-standard lines remaining, except for a few narrow gauge lines of various sizes. Although a model can't be adapted to run on track as narrow as 2 feet, 61 centimeters, gauge, Wiscasset, Waterville and Farmington are, Maine has one. This was a more complex alteration. Colors. By 1918, half of all the cars in the US were Model Ts. In his autobiography, Ford reported that in 1909 he told his management team, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants so long as it is black." 47. However, in the first years of production from 1908 to 1913, the Model T was not available in black, 48, but rather only in gray, green, blue, and red. Green was available for the touring cars, town cars, coupes and landaulettes. Gray was available for the town cars only and red only for the touring cars. By 1912, all cars were being painted midnight blue with black fenders. Only in 1914 was the any color so long as it is black policy finally implemented. It is often stated Ford suggested the use of black from 1914 to 1925 due to the low cost, durability, and faster drying time of black paint in that era. There is no evidence that black dried any faster than any other dark varnishes used at the time for painting. 49. But carbon black pigment was indeed one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, available, and dark color of gilsonite, a form of bitumen making cheap metal paints of time durable, limited the final color options to dark shades of maroon, blue, green or black. 50. At that period Ford used two similar types of the so-called Japan black paint, one as a basic coat applied directly tough metal and another as a final finish. Paint choices in the American automotive industry, as well as in others, including locomotives, furniture, bicycles, and the rapidly expanding field of electrical appliances, were shaped by the development of the chemical industry. These included the disruption of dye sources during World War I and the advent, by the mid-1920s, of new nitrocellulose lacquers that were faster drying and more scratch-resistant and obviated the need for multiple coats. 51. 261 301 Understanding the choice of paints for the Model T era and the years immediately following requires an understanding of the contemporaneous chemical industry. 51. During the lifetime production of the Model T, over 30 types of black paint were used on various parts of car. 48. These were formulated to satisfy the different means of applying the paint to the various parts and had distinct drying times, depending on the part, paint, and method of drying. Bodies. 1910 Model T, photographed in Salt Lake City. 1910 Model T photographed in Salt Lake City. 1917 Model T. 1917 Model T, 1915 Model T Speedster, 1915 Model T Speedster, 1925 Ford New Model T Tudor Sedan, 1925 Ford New Model T Tudor Sedan. Although Ford classified the Model T with a single-letter designation throughout its entire life and made no distinction by model years, enough significant changes to the body were made over the production life that the car may be classified into several style generations. The most immediately visible and identifiable changes were in the hood and cowl areas, although many other modifications were made to the vehicle. 1909-1914 characterized by a nearly straight, five-sided hood, with a flat top containing a center hinge and two side sloping sections containing the folding hinges. The firewall is flat from the windshield down with no distinct cowl. For these years, acetylene gas flame headlights were used because the flame is resistant to wind and rain. Thick concave mirrors combined with magnifying lenses projected the acetylene flame light. The fuel tank is placed under the front seat. 1915-1916 The hood design is nearly the same five-sided design, with the only obvious change being the addition of louvers to the vertical sides. A significant change to the cowl area occurred with the windshield relocated significantly behind the firewall and joined with a compound contoured cowl panel. In these years, electric headlights replaced carbide headlights. 1917-1923 The hood design was changed to a tapered design with a curved top. Folding hinges were now located at the joint between the flat sides and the curved top. Thighs is sometimes referred to as the low hood to distinguish it from the later hoods. The back edge of the hood now met the front edge of the cowl panel so that no part of the flat firewall was visible outside of the hood. This design was used the longest and during the highest production years, accounting for about half of the total number of Model Ts built. 1923-1925 This change was made during the 1923 calendar year, so models built earlier in the year have the older design, while later vehicles have the newer design. The taper-off hood was increased and the rear section at the firewall is about an inch taller and several inches wider than the previous design. While this is a relatively minor change, the parts between the third and fourth generations are not interchangeable. 1926-1927 This design change made the greatest difference in the appearance of the car. The hood was again enlarged, with the cowl panel no longer a compound curve and blended much more with the line of the hood. The distance between the firewall and the windshield was also increased significantly. This style is sometimes referred to as the high hood. The styling on the last generation was a preview for the following model, but the two models are visually quite different, as the body on the A is much wider and has curved doors as opposed to the flat doors on the T. Diverse applications. Diverse applications. A Model T homemade tractor pulling a plow. A Model T homemade tractor pulling a plow. Pulford Auto to Tractor Conversion Advertisement, 1918. Pulford Auto to Tractor Conversion Advertisement, 1918. The American LaFrance Company modified more than 900 Ford Model Ts to serve firefighters. The American LaFrance Company modified more than 900 Ford Model Ts to serve firefighters. When the Model T was designed and introduced, the infrastructure of the world was quite different from today's. Pavement was a rarity except for sidewalks and a few big city streets. The meaning of the term pavement as opposed to sidewalk comes from that era, when streets and roads were generally dirt and sidewalks were a paved way to walk along them. Agriculture was the occupation of many people. Power tools were scarce outside factories, as were power sources for them. Electrification, like pavement, was found usually only in larger towns. Rural electrification and motorized mechanization were embryonic in some regions and non-existent in most. Henry Ford oversaw the requirements and design of the Model T based on contemporary realities. Consequently, the Model T was, intentionally, almost as much a tractor and portable engine as it was an automobile. It has always been well regarded for its all-terrain abilities and ruggedness. It could travel a rocky, muddy farm lane, cross a shallow stream, climb a steep hill, and be parked on the other side to have one of its wheels removed and a pulley fastened to the hub for a flat belt tar driver, buck saw, thresher, silo blower, conveyor for filling corn cribs or hay lofts, baler, water pump, electrical generator, and many other applications. One unique application of the Model T was shown in the October 1922 issue of Fordson Farmer magazine. It showed a minister who had transformed his Model T into a mobile church, complete with small organ. 52. During this era, entire automobiles, including thousands of Model Ts, were hacked apart by their owners and reconfigured into custom machinery permanently dedicated to a purpose, such as homemade tractor sand ice saws. 53. Dozens of aftermarket companies sold prefab kits to facilitate the TS conversion from car to tractor. 54. The Model T had been around for a decade before the Fordson tractor became available, 1917-18, and many TS had been converted for field use. For example, Harry Ferguson, later famous for his hitches and tractors, worked on Aero's Model T tractor conversions before he worked with Fordsons and others. During the next decade, Model T tractor conversion kits were harder to sell, as the Fordson Anthem, the Farmall, 1924, as well as other light and affordable tractors, served the farm market. But during the Depression, 1930s, Model T tractor conversion kits had a resurgence, because by then used models and junkyard parts for them were plentiful and cheap. 55. Like many popular car engines of the era, the Model T engine was also used on home-built aircraft, such as Piat 10 Paul Sky Scout, and motorboats. An armored car variant, called the Foot-B, was developed in Poland in 1920 due to the high demand during the Polish-Soviet War in 1920. Many Model Ts were converted into vehicles that could travel across heavy snows with kits on the rear wheels, sometimes with an extra pair of rear-mounted wheels and two sets of continuous track to mount on now tandemed rear wheels, essentially making it a half-track, and skis replacing the front wheels. They were popular for rural mail delivery for a time. The common name for these conversions of cars and small trucks was snow flyers. These vehicles were extremely popular in the northern reaches of Canada, where factories were set up to produce them. 56. A number of companies built Model T-based rail cars. 57. In the Great Railway Bazaar, authors mentions a rail journey in India on such a rail car. The New Zealand Railways Department's RM class included a few. The American La France Company modified more than 900 Model Ts for use in firefighting, adding tanks, hoses, tools and a bell. 58. Model T fire engines were in service in North America, Europe, and Australia. 59. 58. A 1919 Model T equipped to fight chemical fires has been restored and is on display at the North Charleston Fire Museum in South Carolina. 60. Production. Mass production. The knowledge and skills needed by a factory worker were reduced to 84 areas. When introduced, the building methods typical at the time, assembly by hand, and production was small. The Ford Piquette Avenue plant could not keep up with demand for the Model T, and only 11 cars were built during the first full month of production. More and more machines were used to reduce the complexity within the 84 defined areas. In 1910, After assembling nearly 12,000 Model Ts, Henry Ford moved the company to the new Highland Park complex. During this time the Model T production system, including Ford Assembly Line, 1913 the supply chain, transitioned into an iconic example of assembly line production. 2761. In subsequent decades it would also be viewed as the classic example of the rigid, first-generation version of assembly line production, as opposed to flexible mass production. 27. Of higher quality products. 61. As a result, Ford's cars came off the line in 3-minute intervals much faster than previous methods, reducing production time from 1 hours before to 93 minutes by 1914, while using less manpower. 62. In 1914, Ford produced more cars than all other automakers combined. The Model T was a great commercial success, and by the time Ford made its 10 millionth car, half of all cars in the world were Ford's. It was so successful Ford did not purchase any advertising between 1917 and 1923. Instead, the Model T became so famous, people considered it a norm. More than 15 million Model Ts were manufactured in all, reaching a rate of 9,000 to 10,000 cars a day in 1925, or 2 million annually. 63, 64, 65, more than any other model of its day, at a price of just $260, $4,017 today. Total Model T production was finally surpassed by the Volkswagen Beetle on the 17th of February, 1972, while the Ford F-Series, itself directly descended from the Model T Roadster pickup, has surpassed the Model T as Ford's all-time best-selling model. Image icon. Ford statistics. 1910-1931 Henry Ford's ideological approach to Model T design was one of getting it right and then keeping it the same. He believed the Model T was all the car a person would, or could, ever need. As if the companies offered comfort and styling advantages, at competitive prices, the Model T lost market share and became barely profitable. 61. Design changes were not as few as the public perceived, but the idea of an unchanging model was kept intact. Eventually, on the 26th of May, 1927, Ford Motor Company ceased use production, 66, 67, 68, and began the changeovers required to produce the model at. 69. Some of the other Model T factories in the world continued for a short while, 70, with the final Model T produced at the Cork, Ireland plant in December 1928. 71. Model T engines continued to be produced until the 4th of August, 1941. Almost 170,000 were built after car production stopped, as replacement engines were required to service the many existing vehicles. Racers and enthusiasts, forerunners of modern hot rodders, used the Model T's blocks to build popular and cheap racing engines, including Krager, Navarro, and, famously, the Frontenacs, Fronty Fords, 67, of the Chevrolet brothers, among many others. The Model T employed some advanced technology, for example, its use of vanadium steel alloy. Its durability was phenomenal, and some Model Ts and their parts are in running order over a century later. Although Henry Ford resisted some kinds of change, he always championed the advancement of materials engineering, and often mechanical engineering and industrial engineering. In 2002, Ford built a final batch of 6 Model Ts as part of their 2003 centenary celebrations. These cars were assembled from remaining new components and other parts produced from the original drawings. The last of the 6 was used for publicity purposes in the UK. Although Ford no longer manufactures parts for the Model T, many parts are still manufactured through private companies as replicas to service the thousands of Model Ts still in operation today. On the 26th of May, 1927, Henry Ford and his son Edsel drove the 15 millionth Model T out of the factory. 25. This marked the famous automobile's official last day of production.